This past dive season, the Northeast had extremely warm water temperatures. In late summer, the water temperatures on the Shark River Reef hit 78 degrees from the surface down to 50 feet, bringing an unexpected guest to this dive. A barracuda traveling from the south decided to stop at the wreck of the Stoltagali. He patrolled above the thermocline, avoiding the cold 55-degree water below. Later that season, a storm came to shore like no other. Sandy wasn't a hurricane when it hit New Jersey and Long Island. Sandy was a superstorm, 600 miles wide. What is in store for us this coming dive season? New wrecks, some uncovered, others covered up, wrecks torn apart. I'm Captain Steve Langevin. Join us for a visit to some of our favorite wrecks in the Northeast. New Jersey and Long Island waters are home to over 7,000 documented shipwrecks. One of our favorite shipwrecks is the Beth de Bob. She is a clam dredge that sank on Wednesday, January 6, 1999, taking 4 of her crew. The Beth de Bob was 84 feet long and weighed 96 tons. Today she sits upright in 120 feet of water and rises off the bottom to 80 feet. The wreck is home to many fish such as blackfish, sea bass, ling, cod, fluke, flounder, and the occasional lobster or monkfish. The outriggers lie in the sand, and access to the wheelhouse has become harder in the past couple of years due to deterioration. The dredge is located near the stern of the boat, and a couple of clam cages just to starboard. There are more clam cages still in the open decks filled with clam shells. In 2000, the crew of the dive boat Dina D salvaged the propeller to donate to the Fisherman's Memorial. But the insurance company laid claim to the prize and won. Just to the east is the largest of all the wrecks on the Shark River Reef, the USS Algol. The Algol was built in 1943 in Oakland, California as the James Barnes. Later, after a conversion, she was named the USS Algol and saw service in World War II, Korea, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. After lying in mothballs in North Fork, Virginia for over 20 years, she was transferred to the New Jersey Artificial Reef Program. The top of the superstructure starts at 75 feet, and the main deck is at 115. I have hit 150 feet in the cargo holds, but they are starting to fill in with sand. The ship is 459 feet long and has a beam of 63 feet, and she can't be seen in one dive. A wreck goes through cycles. 1992 was the first year I dove the ship aboard the Seeker. The ship's navy gray paint was still visible. On the main deck, there were thousands of thumbnail-sized scallops. As you swam over them, they popped up and flew into you. Charlie Turback of Elite Divers and I were excited about the scallops and the ship's potential. Coming back in 1993, I was surprised that there wasn't one scallop on the deck and that the scallops were replaced by baby mussels. Mussels attach to any hard substrate and are the building blocks of any successful reef in the Northeast. The mussels bring in all sorts of fish, especially blackfish. Blackfish with their big teeth can munch on the tiny mussels as a food source. Other fish get the scraps. Mussels die off and are replaced by other growth. That dies off only to be replaced by new generations of mussels. Wrecks are dynamic and are always changing. Bulkheads and partitions collapse, overhead equipment often falls. Over the years, I've taken many lobsters off this wreck. Just to the east of the Algol is our favorite wreck, the Stoltagali. The Stolt was cut in two by the Israeli ocean liner Shalom. After leaving New York on Thanksgiving Day, 1964, the Shalom rammed into the side of the Stoltagali in heavy fog. The bow section floated and the stern section quickly sinking to the bottom. Days after the sinking, divers Mike DeCamp and Jim Caldwell were off to find the wreck.
Stolt was interesting, although it was just a half. We got there 4 days after it went down. It followed us. We didn't know where we were going except the general direction. We ran into an oil slick and decided to follow it. And that was the clue. And finally the fathometer came up and she was down there.
Mike told us of a gruesome discovery inside the wreck.
I found her on the Stolt Galley. I was mucking around the stern, so a porthole in the door. The door wouldn't open, and I stuck my hand through the porthole and grabbed something, which I knew was the end of somebody's leg, and it was Hilma Marie Holman.
Jim Caldwell was hired by the insurance company to tell them the position of the rudder. Jim recovered the auxiliary helm, which is on display at the New Jersey Museum of Maritime History in Beach Haven. On a warm summer day in August 2006, Maureen and I, with 3 of our friends, visited the Stolt. It was an amazing day. Visibility was up to 100 feet of blue water. I was videotaping the wreck when I came across the stern anchor. The next 3 years, Maureen and I worked to raise the anchor. We freed the anchor from the wreck in June with the help of Hank Garvin of the RV Garloo, with crew members Rocky Dimopole, Billy Vogel, and Captain Joe Carlton. The next week, we raised the anchor with the scallop dragger Kim Ann out of Belmar. With the help of Captain Mark Vitolo, the anchor is now on display at the New Jersey Museum of Maritime History. Other artifacts are still being brought back from the Stolt. Andrew Nagel of Pennsylvania recovered the helm stand, which is now on display at Dudis's Diving Duds in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Traveling north to the south shore of Long Island, we visit the Lizzie D. The Lizzie D was discovered by Captain John Larson. She was a 77-foot tugboat built in 1907, used to carry Prohibition Kentucky bourbon and Canadian rye whiskey. Joan Fulmore recovered the ship's bell, which identified the wreck. Today, what is left is the boiler, which is the usual tie-in point, and the outlining hull. The area surrounding the boiler is covered with broken glass. If you carefully remove the layer of broken glass and sift through the underlying mud, you can get an occasional bottle. We have recovered some clear bottles with corks pushed in by the water pressure. The prize bottles are the rectangular green bottles. Southeast of Fire Island Inlet is the wreck of the armored cruiser San Diego. Built in 1904 in San Francisco as the USS California, she served in both the Atlantic and Pacific. She was part of Teddy Roosevelt's Great White Fleet. An act of Congress reserved state names for battleships, and the California was renamed San Diego. The San Diego is easily reached by dive boats out of Long Island, like the RV Garloo. The wreck is in 110 feet of water and reaches up to 65 feet below the surface.
Friday evening, my phone rings and said, "We're going scuba diving tomorrow on the San Diego. You want to come?" I said, "I sure want to go." He said, "I'd be in Freeport, Woodcliff Canal, on the Jeslu at 3 o'clock in the morning." I was on the boat at 2 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't go to sleep that night at all. This is going to be my first trip out into the ocean, my first absolute wreck dive, and to go on the USS San Diego, which a deep dive, it was 100 feet to the bottom. And when you talked about going to 100 feet, back in 1960, 61, you're talking about deep diving. I was so excited I couldn't remember anything. All I know is that when I jumped in the water, and they tell you just swim down until you find the wreck. You just swam as fast as you could down to the bottom. And when you got to the bottom, you looked around, and you'd be like a little dizzy at first. I was swimming down this dark wall, not realizing that I was swimming alongside the hull of the wreck going down. And my dive partner was Roy Keyser. He always had a sinus problem, so he was holding his head, but he was floating maybe about 4 or 5 feet above the bottom. and he was feathering his fins gently. And I looked, and underneath them was like this 4-foot goosefish. I had never seen one before. This is, I'd seen him, understood him from, dangerous marine animals in the book. When a goosefish is awake, its antenna is always moving. If his antenna is not moving, the goosefish is not awake. But he's feathering his fins, and all of a sudden I'm seeing this sand and the silt move off this thing, and I seen this gigantic outline. So I just went over and I grabbed him, and I'm pointing down, because I was like, I was wired, like, this is your first wreck dive. Everything was like so brand new, and I was so excited that I didn't even know I was breathing. We swam around, we swam over to the hull, and the wreck was very, very much intact at that time. And I was just, all I could do is, my eyes must have been about the biggest saucers, just looking at the propellers. That was my first dive.
This one day, this guy comes up from Georgia, and he came specifically to dive to San Diego. And what happened was he needed a buddy. So Steve said, don't worry, I'll put you with somebody good. So he gets on the boat, and Steve tells him he's diving with me. Well, this guy says, I don't want to dive with her. He was like, I want to dive with somebody good. And Steve says, you're diving with her. Of course, Steve pulled me aside and said, this guy has an attitude, Sally, so take him for a ride, basically. So I was diving at the time with the single 71.2 cubic inch tank, an old steel tank, and I had a pony bottle. This guy had doubles. So we go down into San Diego, and I take him out the gun turret and around and through the engine room and up the other side and around and back. And just as I'm turning to take him somewhere else, he taps me on the shoulder and he's low on air. He's so low on air that when we went up and we did the safety stop, I had to give him my regulator, and I went on my pony bottle, and I had at least a half a tank of air left. And then we came up from the dive, and he said to Steve, boy, she's some kind of diver.
At the stern of the 503-foot inverted wreck is a crane barge that sank while trying to recover one of the ship's 18-foot bronze propellers. This is known as a good spot for finding a lobster. The Navy claims ownership, so it is illegal to take any artifacts from the wreck. The San Diego has been declared a National Historic Site and is a war grave. Our last stop is the Greyhound of the Atlantic, the 518-foot Oregon. The Oregon was built by Cunard in 1881 in Scotland. She was lost March 14, 1886, when she collided with the schooner Charles R. Moss. The Oregon was built for speed and luxury. The owners, to save money, built the hull from less expensive iron instead of the more expensive, stronger steel. That's why the wooden schooner was able to sink the much larger ship. The steamer is located off of Fire Island between the lighthouse and Shinnecock Inlet. She sank in 8 hours, no loss of life. She sits in 125 feet of water with the top of the engine coming up to 85 feet.
This is a dish from the Oregon. My buddy Mary and I went diving. I went in the hole. I had to squeeze, and Mary pushed my tanks down to get in. I got the dish. I handed it out to Mary. And of course, the dish was more important than me at the time, so she had to secure the dish first, put it in the bug bag, and then she pushed on my tanks to get me out. And then when I came up, Steve said, are there a bunch of other dishes there? I said, oh yeah, there's a lot of dishes down there. And of course they went down, there weren't any other dishes. This is actually a rare dish because in the early 60s when they dove the wreck, people like Evie Dudas and people of that nature, they were just scattered all over the wreck. But by the time I dove it in the late 70s and early 80s, these were hard to come by. So it's kind of special to me, and I kind of like the story that I kind of tricked Steve.
Easily identifiable landmarks on the wreck are the propeller and the steering quadrant in the stern. Other landmarks which stand out are the engine and the boilers amidship and the partially intact bow.
The Oregon is a very classic wreck. It has a huge engine and the big prop sticking out from the sand.
Pat Rooney recovered one of the ship's anchors, which is located in the front of Long Island Scuba.
I happened to work the bow on the port side, and the helm was still attached to its little stand, and it had a little piece of wood like you would stand on, probably 4 feet wide and 5 feet long. And I'm like, oh, I found the helm. Look. And then I went over to it. Now, it didn't have all its wheel on it. It had some spokes and just a round thing in the center. I go, well, that's pretty garbagey looking. You know, it's not the whole thing. And I pulled it off. I go, it comes off. Then I shoved it right back on again. And then I had to go find John. It's like, come here, I found the helm, you know, and drag him over. Then he took the helm, and by this time we had too much time down. He put the helm between his legs, and we're undoing one of these upline reels, and he became spazzo, and it dropped from between his legs. And when it went right down in front of Mike DeCamp, and I believe that was Don Nitch with Mike. Mike always had a camera, much to his credit because of documenting things, and he was able to take a picture of it. And then Don took one of those Hypro bags out and put a lift bag on it, but he didn't put a line on it, and he sent the Hypro bag up, and the bag proceeded to float away, never to be seen again, and nobody's got the helm.
I hope you enjoy the wrecks of the Northeast, and remember that these are only a handful. There are more than 1,700 located in our waters, and that's only the documented ones.